My name is Isabella Wilson, 34 years old, and I've spent the last 5 years financially supporting my parents while building my career as a financial analyst. Family has always come first for me, even when it meant putting my own dreams on hold. My younger brother James, well, he's always been the golden child who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. I never minded helping out when my parents fell on hard times, but when they announced that James and his family would be moving into the house I pay for, while expecting me to continue footing all the bills, something inside me finally snapped. Before I get into how I finally stood up for myself, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to hear more family drama stories. I grew up in a modest suburban neighborhood on the outskirts of Chicago. Our family wasn't wealthy, but we had enough to get by. From the earliest days, I can remember it was clear that my brother James had a special place in my parents' hearts. 4 years younger than me, James could charm his way out of any situation with his bright smile and quick wit. Our childhood home was filled with James's trophies and artwork proudly displayed on the refrigerator, while my academic achievements often went unnoticed. When I brought home straight A's, my parents would nod approvingly but without much fanfare. When James managed a B-, there would be celebrations and ice cream treats. I learned early on that I needed to be self-sufficient. By age 12, I was babysitting for neighbors to earn my own spending money. By 16, I had a part-time job at the local library while maintaining a perfect GPA. James, meanwhile, spent most of his time playing video games and hanging out with friends. When he needed money, he simply asked our parents, who always indulged him. "James is just more social than you," my mother would say when I questioned the double standard. "He needs to develop those people skills. You've always been so independent." That independence wasn't exactly by choice, but I grew to value it. By the time high school graduation approached, I had saved enough from my various jobs to contribute to my college education. I applied for every scholarship I could find, and was thrilled to receive enough financial aid to attend the University of Illinois without burdening my parents. James took a different path. When he graduated high school 2 years after me, my parents dipped into their retirement savings to send him to a private university. He changed majors 3 times before dropping out in his junior year, claiming college wasn't for him. The money my parents had invested in his education vanished without a degree to show for it. Meanwhile, I worked through college with 2 part-time jobs while maintaining a spot on the dean's list. I graduated with a degree in finance and landed an entry-level position at a respected financial firm in downtown Chicago. Over the next decade, I built my career meticulously. I earned certifications, took night classes for my MBA, and climbed the corporate ladder until I became a senior financial analyst at Patterson & Blackwell, one of the most prestigious firms in the Midwest. My salary grew accordingly, allowing me to save for my future while helping my parents when needed. James bounced between jobs that never seemed to last longer than 6 months. He worked briefly as a bartender, then a sales associate, then at a marketing firm. Each position ended with some dramatic story about unreasonable bosses or toxic workplaces. Never once did James acknowledge that he might be the common denominator in these failed opportunities. The pattern of financial irresponsibility continued into adulthood. When James totaled his car after driving home intoxicated from a party, my parents paid his fines and bought him a new vehicle. When his credit card debt spiraled out of control, they consolidated it and paid it off. Each time I watched silently, wondering when my brother would be expected to face consequences for his actions. Then James met Natalie at age 26. She seemed like a stabilizing influence, at first organized and practical, where James was chaotic and impulsive. They married quickly, and within 2 years had 2 children, Emma and Luke. I hoped fatherhood would mature my brother, but if anything, the added responsibility seemed to overwhelm him. Around this time, my parents faced their own financial crisis. Dad retired early due to health issues, and their savings weren't sufficient to maintain their lifestyle. The medical bills started piling up, and they fell behind on their mortgage payments. That's when I stepped in with what I thought would be a temporary solution. I had recently purchased a second property as an investment, a modest 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood. I offered to let my parents live there, paying only a fraction of the market rate for rent, just enough to cover the property taxes while they got back on their feet financially. Just until Dad's health improves and you can figure out a more sustainable plan, I told them when handing over the keys. They accepted gratefully, and I felt good about being able to help. I was 30 at the time and had recently started dating Michael, an architectural engineer I'd met through a mutual friend. Unlike my previous boyfriends, Michael didn't seem intimidated by my financial success or independence. He understood my commitment to family, having come from a close-knit one himself. However, he was the first to notice the troubling pattern forming with my parents and James. "You realize you're enabling them, right?" Michael asked gently one evening after we'd had dinner with my family. "Your brother hasn't held a job for more than a few months, yet he just mentioned buying a new gaming system." "They're family," I replied defensively. "What am I supposed to do? Let them struggle when I have the means to help?" Michael squeezed my hand. "There's a difference between helping and creating dependency. I'm just worried about you, Isabella." I brushed off his concerns then, but his words would return to me in the months ahead, growing louder with each passing day. What began as a temporary arrangement to help my parents through a rough patch gradually transformed into an expected, ongoing support system. The initial agreement was that they would pay a reduced rent of $500 monthly while they rebuilt their finances after Dad's medical issues. That amount covered less than half of the mortgage payment, not to mention property taxes, insurance, and maintenance costs. Within 6 months, the excuses began. "We're a little short this month, sweetheart. Dad's prescription costs went up again," Mom would say apologetically over the phone. "Can we pay you $300 instead of the full $500? We'll make it up next month." Next month would come, and there would be another reason: unexpected car repairs, a dental emergency, rising grocery costs. Eventually, the pretense of making it up later faded away entirely. My parents began to treat my financial support as a given, rather than the temporary assistance it was meant to be. Meanwhile, my own financial sacrifices accumulated quietly. I lived in a small 1-bedroom apartment, despite being able to afford something larger to maintain the cash flow needed to cover 2 households. My commute to work was 45 minutes each way because I couldn't afford to live closer to downtown while paying for my parents' housing. "Why don't we take that trip to Spain we've been talking about?" Michael asked on our 1-year anniversary. "You deserve a break, and I've saved enough for both of us." I sighed, knowing it wasn't possible. "I can't right now. The property taxes on my parents' house are due next month, and they're higher than I budgeted for." Michael's expression tightened momentarily before he masked his disappointment. "Maybe next year, then." But next year brought more of the same. Michael and I had tentatively discussed moving in together, even marriage, but those plans remained theoretical as long as my financial resources were stretched thin. While we never argued about money directly, I could feel his growing frustration with the situation. "Have you talked to your parents about a timeline for them becoming more self-sufficient?" he asked one evening as I pored over my budget spreadsheet, trying to find another $100 to cut from my personal expenses. "It's complicated," I replied, not meeting his eyes. "Dad's health still isn't great, and their Social Security barely covers their basic needs." "What about James? He's their son, too. Couldn't he contribute something?" I laughed bitterly. "James can barely support himself and his family. He just lost another job last month, something about philosophical differences with his manager." The truth was, I had suggested to my parents several times that James might help share the burden. Each time they became defensive. "Your brother has a family to support now," Mom would say. "He has those 2 little ones to think about," as if I didn't have my own life, my own future to consider. My monthly financial statement told the painful story. My salary as a senior financial analyst was respectable at $87,000 annually. But after taxes, retirement contributions, health insurance, and other deductions, My take-home pay was about $4,800 monthly. From that amount, $1,400 went to my own rent and utilities. $1,700 covered the mortgage insurance and average maintenance costs for my parents' house. $500 went to my student loan payments. $300 covered my car payment and insurance. That left me with just $900 monthly for everything else: food, gas, clothes, emergencies, and any hope of savings beyond my 401k. Meanwhile, James and Natalie rented a 3-bedroom apartment in a trendy neighborhood. They took weekend trips to Wisconsin Dells with the kids. James bought a new iPhone the week it was released, all while jumping between jobs and frequently borrowing money from our parents, who in turn were being supported by me. The resentment began as a small ember, easy to extinguish with reminders of family loyalty and duty. But each time I skipped a night out with friends because of budget constraints, each time I put off a needed car repair, each time I saw James post vacation photos on social media, that ember grew hotter. Michael noticed the toll it was taking. "You look exhausted," he said one Sunday evening as I prepared for the week ahead. "You're working 60-hour weeks to support 2 households. This isn't sustainable, Isabella." "What choice do I have?" I asked, my voice catching. "They're my parents." "You have choices," he said gently. "You're just afraid to make them." I knew he was right, but I wasn't ready to acknowledge it. Not yet. That would change sooner than I expected. Family dinner at my parents' house, the one I paid for, was a monthly tradition. Usually these gatherings were predictable affairs. Mom would cook too much food. Dad would complain about neighborhood kids on his lawn, and James would dominate the conversation with stories about his latest venture or the children's accomplishments. I would listen politely, ask appropriate questions, and avoid any topics that might lead to financial discussions. This particular Sunday in April seemed no different at first. The spring air was crisp, flowers were beginning to bloom in Mom's carefully tended garden, and the smell of pot roast filled the house as Michael and I arrived, wine bottle in hand. James and his family weren't there yet, typically running late as always. We sat in the living room, making small talk with my parents. Dad looked better than he had in months, his color good, and his energy higher than I'd seen recently. "The new medication seems to be working well," he said when I commented on it. "Doctor says my numbers are improving." "That's wonderful news," I replied, genuinely pleased. Perhaps with improved health, they might consider finding part-time work or downsizing to something more affordable. I made a mental note to broach the subject delicately after dinner. James arrived 30 minutes late, Natalie looking flustered as she herded 5-year-old Emma and 3-year-old Luke into the house. The children immediately ran to their grandparents for hugs and to show off new toys. "Sorry we're late," James said without sounding sorry at all. "Traffic was a nightmare." Dinner proceeded normally at first. We passed dishes, family style, around the table, the conversation flowing between updates on the children's preschool adventures and neighborhood gossip. I noticed James seemed unusually animated, exchanging meaningful glances with our mother throughout the meal. As we finished the main course, Mom cleared her throat. "We have some exciting news to share," she announced, smiling broadly. My stomach tightened instinctively. In my experience, exciting news in this family usually meant some decision had been made that would impact me without my input. "James and Natalie are going through a rough patch financially," Mom continued. "The company James was working for downsized last month, and they're struggling to make rent on their apartment." This wasn't news to me. James lost jobs regularly enough that it hardly qualified as an announcement. I nodded sympathetically, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "So," Dad jumped in, "we've decided that they'll move in here temporarily. Isn't that wonderful? The kids can have the spare bedroom, and James and Natalie can set up in the finished basement." I froze, fork halfway to my mouth. "Move in here, for how long?" "Just until James gets back on his feet," Mom said vaguely. "You know how the job market is these days." "We're thinking a few months, maybe through the end of the year," James added casually. "It'll help us save for a down payment on our own place eventually." The end of the year was 8 months away. 8 months of supporting not just my parents, but my brother's entire family as well. I set down my fork carefully. That's a significant change, I said, choosing my words with caution. What about the financial arrangements? The mortgage, utilities, and other expenses will increase with 4 more people living here. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. My parents exchanged glances. Well, Dad finally said, we figured things would stay the same as they are now. You've been so generous with helping us with the mortgage. James needs time to find stable employment and save money. So, I would continue paying the mortgage and most expenses while James and his family live here rent-free. I clarified, my voice tight. That's what family does for each other, Mom said with a hint of reproach. We support each other in times of need. You're doing so well in your career, Isabella. James nodded in agreement. It's not like you have kids to support or anything. I've got Emma and Luke to think about. I felt Michael tense beside me, but was grateful when he remained silent, allowing me to handle this myself. I understand families supporting each other, I said slowly. But I'm already supporting this household significantly. Adding 4 more people will increase costs substantially. Water, electricity, food, wear and tear on the house. We'll contribute to groceries when we can, Natalie offered quietly, the first indication she recognized the imposition. James waved dismissively. It's not like it'll change your mortgage payment. You're paying it anyway. His entitled attitude sparked something in me, but I maintained my composure. When are you planning to move in? We've already given notice at our apartment, James said cheerfully. We'll start moving boxes next weekend. They had already made these plans without consulting me, the person paying for the house. I felt a flush of anger, but swallowed it down. I see, was all I said. Well, this is certainly unexpected. Michael and I should probably head out. I have an early meeting tomorrow. I made polite goodbyes, accepting my mother's hug mechanically and promising to call later in the week. The drive home was silent for the first few minutes, my thoughts racing. Are you okay? Michael finally asked as we hit the freeway. No, I admitted, my voice shaking slightly. I can't believe they just announced this without even asking me first. It's your house, Michael pointed out. Technically, you could say no. They don't see it that way. They've been living there so long they think of it as theirs. I sighed heavily. I don't know what to do. You could do nothing and continue being taken advantage of, Michael said carefully. Or you could finally stand up for yourself and establish some boundaries. If I push back, I'm the bad guy, I said. The selfish daughter who won't help her family. And if you don't, you'll continue postponing our future together while supporting people who don't appreciate what you're sacrificing, Michael replied gently. I love how loyal you are to your family, Isabella, but this has gone beyond loyalty into exploitation. His words hung in the air between us. Deep down, I knew he was right. This pattern had gone on far too long, and this latest development was a bridge too far. The question was, did I have the courage to finally draw a line? I need to think, I said as we pulled up to my apartment building. This isn't a decision I can make tonight. Michael nodded, understanding as always. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. But remember, sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop enabling harmful patterns. I kissed him goodnight, then went upstairs to what would be a very sleepless night. Sleep evaded me that night as I tossed and turned, my mind racing through years of family history and financial decisions that had led to this moment. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw James's casual dismissal of my concerns at dinner, my mother's disappointed expression when I didn't immediately embrace their plan, and Michael's supportive but worried face as we parted. At 3 a.m, I gave up on sleep and moved to my small home office. I opened my laptop and began pulling up financial records, creating a comprehensive picture of exactly how much support I had provided over the years. The numbers were staggering when compiled in one spreadsheet. In the 5 years since my parents had moved into the house, I had contributed over $102,000 toward the mortgage, property taxes, and major repairs. This didn't include countless smaller expenses. I'd covered a new refrigerator when the old one died, landscaping costs when the large oak in the backyard needed removal, the bathroom renovation when the shower began leaking into the basement. By dawn, I had created a detailed financial projection of what supporting 2 additional adults and 2 children would cost. The utilities alone would likely increase by 30 to 40%. Food costs, wear and tear on the house, potential damage from young children. All of it added up to thousands of additional dollars annually that would come from my pocket while James contributed nothing. I showered and dressed for work in a daze, the numbers swimming before my eyes. At the office, I went through the motions, attending meetings and responding to emails, but my mind remained fixed on my family situation. During my lunch break, I called Miranda, my financial advisor, and scheduled an emergency consultation for that evening. I need to understand the impact of increasing my financial support for family members, I explained, and explore alternatives if I decide I can't continue at the current level. After work, I met Miranda at her office downtown. She reviewed my spreadsheets with a professional detachment that I desperately needed. "Isabella, from a purely financial perspective, this is unsustainable," she said, finally removing her reading glasses. "You're compromising your own retirement savings emergency fund and quality of life to support multiple adults who could be contributing themselves." "But they're family," I said, echoing the justification I'd used for years. "Family support is admirable," Miranda acknowledged. "But there's a difference between helping during a crisis and creating permanent dependency. Based on these projections, you'll never be able to buy your own home to live in, take a sabbatical, or retire comfortably if this continues." I left Miranda's office with a clearer financial picture, but still emotionally conflicted. On impulse, I called my friend Taylor and asked if she could meet for dinner. Taylor had known me since college and had watched the family dynamic play out for years. We met at a quiet restaurant near her apartment, and I unloaded the entire situation. "I'm not surprised," Taylor said after listening intently. "This has been building for years. Your parents and James have been taking advantage of your generosity while giving nothing back." "That sounds harsh." I winced, though part of me knew she was right. "It's not harsh, it's reality," Taylor insisted. "Look, I come from a big family too. We support each other, but there's reciprocity. When my sister needed help with her medical bills, we all pitched in according to our means. When my parents needed their roof repaired, all us siblings split the cost proportionally based on our incomes. That's healthy family support." She reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "What you're describing is one-sided exploitation disguised as family obligation. And now they want to increase the burden without even consulting you first." "So what do I do?" I asked, feeling lost. "You set boundaries," Taylor said firmly. "Clear, non-negotiable boundaries with consequences if they're violated. You tell them what you can and cannot do moving forward." That night, I continued my research, looking up rental rates in my parents' neighborhood. A 3-bedroom house like theirs would typically rent for around $2,200 monthly. James and Natalie had been paying $1,700 for their apartment. My parents were paying me just $500 monthly, less than a quarter of market value. The next day, I took a personal day from work and scheduled an appointment with a therapist who specialized in family dynamics. Dr. Winters listened carefully as I described the situation. "What you're experiencing is very common in family systems with established roles," she explained. "You've been cast as the responsible one, the fixer, while your brother is permitted to remain childlike and dependent. These patterns become self-reinforcing over time unless someone disrupts the system." "How do I disrupt it without blowing up my family relationships?" I asked. By being clear about what you can offer, setting firm boundaries, and being prepared for resistance, she replied. Family systems resist change often quite dramatically at first. There may be anger, guilt tripping, even temporary estrangement. The question is whether maintaining the current unhealthy dynamic is worth the personal cost to you. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a journal, writing out my thoughts in a stream of consciousness. The exercise helped clarify what I truly wanted: not to abandon my family, but to establish a more balanced, reciprocal relationship where everyone contributed according to their ability. I created a detailed list of my own deferred dreams and goals: buying a home for myself to live in rather than renting, traveling more extensively, eventually starting a family with Michael, pursuing a director-level position that would require additional education. None of these goals would be possible if I continued supporting multiple households indefinitely. Something had to change, and it became clear that I would have to be the one to initiate that change, regardless of how uncomfortable the confrontation might be. By the end of my soul-searching process, I had made my decision. It was time to stand up for myself and my future. With a newfound resolve, I began preparing for the conversation that would either transform my family dynamic or fracture it entirely. The week following my parents' announcement was a blur of preparation. I gathered financial documents, prepared spreadsheets, and rehearsed what I would say. Michael offered to come with me for moral support, but I decided this was something I needed to handle alone. "This is between me and my family," I told him. "I need to establish that I can set boundaries on my own." He respected my decision, but made me promise to call him immediately afterward, regardless of the outcome. "I'll have comfort food and wine ready," he assured me. I chose Saturday morning for the confrontation, giving myself the rest of the weekend to process whatever happened. I arrived at my parents' house at 10, carrying a portfolio of documents and a resolve that wavered with each step toward the front door. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed an unfamiliar moving truck parked on the street. My stomach dropped as I realized James and his family were already in the process of moving, and further evidence they had never considered my input necessary. Mom answered the door with flour on her apron. "Isabella? What a nice surprise. I'm making cookies with Emma. Come in, come in." The living room was cluttered with boxes labeled kids' toys and James's office equipment. The sight strengthened my resolve. I took a deep breath. "Is everyone here? I need to talk to you all." Mom's smile faltered slightly. "Well, James and your father are bringing up more boxes from the truck. Natalie's organizing the basement. Is everything okay?" "I'd like to have a family meeting," I said firmly. "It's important. Can you gather everyone in the living room in 15 minutes? Something in my tone must have conveyed the seriousness of the situation, because Mom nodded without further questions. "I'll get everyone together." I waited in the kitchen, declining offers of coffee or freshly baked cookies. My heart raced, but I remained outwardly calm. 15 minutes later, I entered the living room where my family had assembled, expressions ranging from curious to mildly annoyed at the interruption to their moving day. "Thanks for taking the time to meet with me." I began sitting down and opening my portfolio. "I wanted to discuss the new living arrangement and the financial implications." Dad shifted uncomfortably. "Is this really necessary right now? James and Natalie have a lot of unpacking to do." "Yes, it's necessary," I replied evenly. "This affects all of us, and we need to have a clear understanding going forward." I pulled out the first document, a summary of all financial contributions I had made toward the house over the past 5 years. "As you know, I purchased this house as an investment property 5 years ago. When you needed a place to live after Dad's health issues, I offered it to you at a significantly reduced rent of $500 monthly, despite the mortgage, taxes, and insurance costing me over $2,100. I passed copies of the summary to each adult in the room. Over the past 5 years, I've contributed over $100,000 to maintain this household, not including regular maintenance and emergency repairs. Uncomfortable silence fell over the room. James glanced at the document and set it aside dismissively, but I noticed Natalie studying the numbers with widening eyes. I agreed to this arrangement temporarily to help during a family crisis, I continued. But it's evolved into an open-ended commitment that's affecting my own financial security and future. We appreciate everything you've done, Mom interjected. You know we do, sweetheart. I nodded acknowledgement, but pressed on pulling out the next document. This is a projection of household expenses with 6 people living here instead of 2. Utilities will increase by approximately 40%. Wear and tear on the house will accelerate. The financial burden on me would increase by an estimated $800 to $1,000 monthly. We're family, Dad said, his voice taking on an edge of defensiveness. We help each other. Yes, we are family, I agreed, which is why I've prepared 2 options for moving forward. I distributed the next document a formal proposal. Option 1. If James, Natalie, and the children move in, all adults in the household contribute proportionally to expenses based on income. I've calculated suggested contributions based on what I know about everyone's financial situation. The proposal indicated my parents would continue paying $500 monthly, while James and Natalie would contribute $900, bringing the total to $1,400, still below market rate, but much closer to covering the actual costs. Option 2. I continued before anyone could interrupt. I will help you sell this property and find something more affordable that you can maintain independently. I'm prepared to cover moving costs and provide a one-time contribution toward a security deposit on a new rental. The silence that followed was deafening. James was the first to break it, his face flushed with anger. You're charging us rent to live with Mom and Dad after everything they've done for us growing up. I'm asking you to contribute fairly to a household that I'm financially responsible for, I corrected him. Just as you were paying rent for your apartment, you would pay a portion of the costs here, still well below market rate. We can't afford $900 a month right now, James snapped. I'm between jobs, remember? You were paying $1,700 for your apartment, I pointed out. Where was that money coming from? James looked away, not answering. I suspected my parents had been helping him with his rent, too likely from the retirement funds they claimed were insufficient for their own needs. This is ridiculous, James continued, his voice rising. You make plenty of money at your fancy job. What do you even spend it on? You don't have kids, you drive an ordinary car, you live in a tiny apartment. You're just being selfish. The accusation stung, but I was prepared for it. I've shown you exactly what I spend my money on, I said, gesturing to the financial summary. Supporting this household has prevented me from buying my own home, taking necessary career development courses, and building adequate savings for my future. Dad leaned forward, his expression softening into the persuasive look he'd used throughout my childhood when he wanted me to agree to something. Isabella, honey, we understand this is a big change. But it's temporary, just until James gets back on his feet. You wouldn't want your niece and nephew to be without a stable home, would you? The guilt tactic was familiar and had worked countless times before. This time, I was inoculated against it. Emma and Luke will have a stable home if everyone contributes fairly, I replied. I'm not asking for anything unreasonable. In fact, you'd still be paying far less than market rate for a house this size in this neighborhood. So that's it. James stood up, his voice rising further. Pay up or get out. Is that your ultimatum to your own family? Those are the options I can offer while maintaining my own financial health, I said, keeping my voice steady despite my racing heart. I've supported this household alone for 5 years. I cannot and will not take on the additional financial burden of supporting 2 more adults and 2 children indefinitely. The argument escalated from there. James called me selfish, cold-hearted, a bean-counting robot who cared more about money than family. Mom began crying quietly, which would normally have crumbled my resolve. Dad tried repeatedly to suggest compromises that essentially maintained the status quo with minor adjustments. Through it all, I remained calm and firm, returning always to the basic financial reality. I could no longer be the sole financial support for an extended family household. Either expenses needed to be shared equitably, or the living arrangement needed to change. After nearly an hour of circular arguments, I gathered my documents and stood up. I understand this is a lot to process. I'm not asking for an answer today. Take a week to discuss it among yourselves and let me know which option you prefer by next Saturday. If I don't hear from you, I'll proceed with listing the property for sale. You'd really kick your own parents out of their home? James asked incredulously. This is not their home. It's my investment property that I've allowed them to live in at a greatly reduced rate. I corrected him, my patience finally wearing thin. And I'm not kicking anyone out. I'm offering 2 reasonable options that respect both your needs and mine. I left before the situation could escalate further, walking to my car, with legs that felt like jelly despite my outward composure. Once inside with the doors locked, I finally allowed myself to exhale fully, my hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel. The hardest part was done. I had stated my boundaries clearly and offered reasonable options. Now it was up to my family to decide how to respond. The silence after my ultimatum was excruciating. 3 days passed without a word from any family member. No calls, no texts, not even an angry email. The absence of communication was so unlike my mother, who typically called multiple times a week, that it felt orchestrated a collective silent treatment designed to make me reconsider my position. Michael was my rock during this period. They're regrouping, he reassured me, testing to see if your resolve will weaken if they ignore you long enough. Stay strong. I threw myself into work, grateful for the distraction of quarterly reports and client meetings. My colleague Jennifer noticed my preoccupation during our lunch break. You seem a million miles away, she commented. Everything okay? I surprised myself by confiding in her. Jennifer was in her 50s, a mentor figure I respected for her professional achievements and balanced approach to life. You did the right thing, she said without hesitation after hearing my story. I went through something similar with my sister years ago. The hardest part is breaking the pattern, but once new expectations are established, relationships often improve. Her words were comforting, but the silence from my family continued to weigh heavily. On the 4th day, my phone finally chimed with a text from my mother. Your father and I are very hurt by your attitude. After everything we've done for you growing up, we never expected such cold treatment in our golden years. James says you've always been jealous of him. We raised you better than this. The guilt trip was so transparent it almost made me laugh despite the pain it caused. I showed the message to Michael that evening. Classic manipulation, he observed. Notice how there's no acknowledgement of your financial support, just an attempt to make you feel like an ungrateful child. It still hurts, I admitted. Of course it does, he said gently. They know exactly which buttons to push because they installed them. The next day, I checked social media against my better judgment. James had posted a long, vague booking status about family members who turn their backs when you're down on your luck, and the true meaning of family being lost in today's materialistic world. It had garnered dozens of sympathetic comments from friends who knew nothing of the actual situation. Rather than engage in a public family dispute, I closed the app and called my real estate agent Sharon to discuss listing the property. I wasn't ready to pull the trigger yet, but I wanted to understand my options if my family chose not to accept either of my proposals. The market in that neighborhood is hot right now, Sharon told me after reviewing comparable sales. You could likely sell for about 30% more than you paid 5 years ago, even factoring in the costs of any updates needed before listing. I also consulted with Alan, a lawyer friend who specialized in real estate, to understand my legal obligations. Since your parents don't have a formal lease, they're essentially month-to-month tenants, he explained. You'd need to provide 60 days' notice under state law before requiring them to vacate. And while you can sell a property with tenants in place, it typically reduces the pool of potential buyers, and might affect the sale price. Armed with this information, I felt more confident that I had viable options regardless of my family's decision. I was prepared to enforce my boundaries even if it meant taking more drastic steps. On the 6th day after my ultimatum, my mother finally called. Her voice was strained but conciliatory. "We'd like to talk," she said without preamble. "Can you come over tomorrow evening?" "Is everyone going to be there?" I asked, wanting to avoid a situation where I was outnumbered or blindsided. "Yes, James and Natalie too. We want to discuss your proposals." We agreed on 7 o'clock the following evening. I spent the day mentally reviewing my documentation one final time, and reminding myself of the boundaries I needed to maintain. This time, Michael drove me to my parents' house but waited in the car. "Just text if you need me," he said, squeezing my hand reassuringly. The atmosphere inside was tense but less hostile than during our previous meeting. The living room had been cleared of moving boxes, and everyone sat with uncharacteristic formality, like strangers at a business meeting rather than family. "Thanks for coming," Dad began awkwardly. "We've been discussing your proposals." I noticed immediately that the power dynamic had shifted. Where previously my parents had presided over family discussions with unquestioned authority, now there was a tentative quality to their demeanor. They were negotiating rather than dictating. "After careful consideration," Mom continued, "we think we can make option 1 work with some adjustments." I maintained a neutral expression, waiting to hear the specifics before responding. "We can increase our contribution to $600 monthly," Dad said. "It's a stretch with our fixed income, but we can make it work by cutting back on some expenses." I nodded, acknowledging this as a reasonable increase given their limited resources. "As for James and Natalie," Mom glanced at them nervously. "They've agreed to contribute, but they can't manage $900 right away while James is job hunting." James cleared his throat. "We can do $500 to start," he said, not meeting my eyes, "and increase it to the full $900 once I'm employed again." It wasn't ideal, but it was a starting point for negotiation. "How long do you anticipate the job search taking?" I asked. "I have a promising lead at Davidson Marketing," James replied. "Second interview next week. If that works out, I could be employed within a month." Something in his tone caught my attention. There was a defensiveness I recognized from childhood when he was hiding something. I decided to press a little. "That's good to hear. And if that doesn't work out, what's your contingency plan?" James shifted uncomfortably and exchanged glances with Natalie. The tension in the room thickened. "Actually," Natalie spoke up suddenly, "I've been meaning to talk to everyone about this." She straightened in her seat, displaying a confidence I hadn't seen from her before. "I've accepted a position at Meridian Healthcare starting next month. It's full-time with benefits." This was clearly news to my parents, whose expressions registered surprise. James looked like he'd swallowed something unpleasant. "I have a nursing degree I never fully utilized after the kids were born," Natalie continued. "With Emma in kindergarten now and Luke starting preschool, it's time for me to return to my career." "That's wonderful," I said, genuinely pleased for her. "Congratulations. It means we can definitely commit to the $900 contribution," she added. "My starting salary is very reasonable, and the healthcare benefits will save us considerably on medical expenses." James's expression had darkened further, but he remained silent. I suspected this development had been a source of conflict between them, perhaps tied to traditional gender role expectations James might have inherited from our parents. "Well," I said, taking control of the conversation again, "this sounds workable. I'd like to formalize it with a simple rental agreement that outlines everyone's responsibilities clearly." My father bristled visibly. "Is that really necessary? We're family, not strangers." "It's standard practice and protects everyone," I replied calmly. "It will spell out what each party is responsible for, from financial contributions to maintenance, and give everyone clarity on expectations." After some further discussion about specifics, we reached a tentative agreement. My parents would pay $600 monthly. James and Natalie would pay $500, initially increasing to $900 within 2 months, regardless of James's employment status. All utilities would be split proportionally, and any repairs over $200 would be discussed collectively before proceeding. As we were wrapping up, Natalie surprised me by asking to speak privately before I left. We stepped out onto the back porch, while the others remained inside. "I want you to know I support what you're doing," she said quietly. "This arrangement hasn't been fair to you, and it hasn't been healthy for James either." I was taken aback by her candor. "Thank you for saying that." She sighed, looking out at the darkening yard. "James has potential, but he's never been held accountable. His parents bail him out, then you bail them out. It's a cycle that needs to break if he's ever going to grow up and be the father our children deserve." Her insight was surprising and refreshing. "That's very self-aware." "I've been in therapy," she admitted with a small smile, "trying to understand why I've enabled his behavior too. But I'm done with that now. That's partly why I went back to nursing, to establish some independence for myself and the kids." Before we went back inside, she added one more thing. "I'll make sure we follow through on our end of the agreement. You have my word." As I left that evening, there was a cautious optimism in my heart. The conversation had gone better than expected, and Natalie's unexpected alliance gave me hope that real change was possible. But I knew better than to assume everything was resolved based on promises alone. The real test would be in the follow-through in the months ahead, when words had to transform into consistent actions. I had taken the first crucial step by disrupting the unhealthy pattern that had governed our family dynamics for years. Now we all had to navigate the new terrain together 1 month at a time. 6 months after our family meeting, I sat across from Michael at our favorite restaurant, celebrating not just my promotion to Director of Financial Analysis, but also the stability that had finally taken root in my family dynamics. "To new beginnings," Michael toasted, raising his glass of champagne. "And to you finding your voice." I smiled, clinking my glass against his. "It hasn't been easy, but it's been worth it." The transition hadn't been smooth initially. The first month after our agreement, James and Natalie paid their portion of rent on time, but my parents were 3 days late, accompanied by a text full of excuses about a mix-up with their pension deposit date. I held firm, politely reminding them of our agreement and suggesting they adjust their payment schedule to account for such variables in the future. By the second month, something remarkable happened. James secured a position at a digital marketing firm. It wasn't the role he'd interviewed for initially, but a more junior position with growth potential. To my surprise, he accepted it without complaint. "It's a foot in the door," he told me during a family dinner, a new humility in his voice. "The director said if I proved myself, I could advance within a year." Natalie had started her nursing job and was thriving. The transformation in her was remarkable. More confident, energetic, proud of contributing to her family's well-being. The children seemed happier too, perhaps responding to the reduced tension between their parents. By the 3rd month, all payments were arriving on time without reminders. When the dishwasher broke down, James researched repair options and split the cost with me as agreed, rather than expecting me to handle it entirely. "I think he's actually growing up," I marveled to Michael after that incident. "I never thought I'd see the day." "People rise or fall to meet expectations," Michael replied. "You finally expected more from him, and he's adjusting." My relationship with my parents gradually improved as well. The initial resentment faded as our new arrangement normalized. Mom still occasionally made comments about how things were before, but they were fewer and farther between. Dad's health continued to stabilize, and he even took a part-time job as a consultant for his former company, working remotely just 10 hours a week, but adding to their income and sense of purpose. The most unexpected development came at the 4-month mark when my family suggested we all attend counseling together. It was James who brought it up, shocking everyone. "Natalie and I have been seeing a family therapist," he explained somewhat sheepishly. "It's been helping us communicate better. I thought maybe we all could benefit from something similar." We found a therapist specializing in family dynamics who helped us navigate the complex emotions and established patterns that had led to our dysfunctional financial arrangement. During one particularly powerful session, James actually apologized to me. "I've taken you for granted," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "I assumed it was your job to take care of everyone because you were successful. I never stopped to think about what you were sacrificing." Those words healed something deep within me that I hadn't even realized was still wounded. Now, 6 months later, we had established a new normal that seemed almost miraculous compared to where we'd started. My parents and James's family continued sharing the house, but with clear boundaries and expectations. Everyone contributed fairly according to their means. When unexpected expenses arose, we discussed them collectively and shared costs appropriately. Most importantly, I had reclaimed my financial independence. With the reduced burden of supporting my family, I'd been able to increase my retirement contributions, start saving for a down payment on my own home, and invest in professional development courses that led directly to my recent promotion. My relationship with Michael had strengthened through the ordeal. He had supported me without pushing his own agenda, offering wisdom when asked, but always respecting that these were my boundaries to set and my decisions to make. "I have something else to celebrate tonight," he said, pulling me back to the present moment in the restaurant. He reached into his pocket and placed a small velvet box on the table between us. My breath caught as he opened it to reveal a simple but elegant diamond ring. "Isabella Wilson, you are the strongest, most compassionate woman I know," he said, his eyes shining with emotion. "I've watched you transform your family relationships while staying true to yourself, and it's made me love you even more. Will you marry me?" Tears blurred my vision as I nodded, too overwhelmed to speak at first. "Yes," I finally managed to say. "Absolutely yes." Later that night, as we shared our news with friends, I reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. Standing up for myself hadn't destroyed my family as I'd feared. Instead, it had transformed our relationships into something healthier and more balanced. By refusing to continue enabling dysfunctional patterns, I had actually helped everyone grow. The most profound lesson I'd learned was that true family support isn't measured by how much you sacrifice yourself for others, but by how you help each other become your best selves, even when that requires difficult conversations and uncomfortable boundaries. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for your family is to stop letting them take advantage of you. In my case, that difficult stand had ultimately brought us closer together with more authentic relationships based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. As I looked toward my future with Michael, I felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that I had finally broken free from the unhealthy patterns of my past while preserving the family relationships that mattered to me. It wasn't perfect. No family ever is, but it was honest, balanced, and sustainable. For the first time in years, I could focus on building my own future rather than constantly rescuing others. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who are taking advantage of your generosity? Let me know in the comments below how you handled it. If you found my story helpful or relatable, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to hear more stories about navigating complicated family dynamics. Remember, taking care of yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary if you want to truly be there for the people you love in a healthy, sustainable way. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you courage in your own.